Hello everyone, this is part 1 of What If Naruto Was in Anbu at 6, and this story is made by LD1449, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
7 Anbu Black Ops stood before the Hokage. The aged man looked him over with a stern, serious gaze. 6 of them had normal Anbu masks while the 7th, also the shortest of the group, had a simple faceplate, not unlike the Kiri Hunter elite. Its slit eye holes revealing only the faintest glimmer of the true eyes lying beneath. Report. Sarutobi commanded. The captain, wearing a hawk mask, straightened before he answered. Hokage-sama, mission success. The Iwa daimyo and his family are all dead. Casualties. Sarutobi spoke. The Anbu captain looked to the fox-masked shinobi. None, sir, he said after a moment. Kaden efficiently demolished the opposing enemy force, leaving us to go after the daimyo and his family. Sarutobi took a puff of his pipe. I see. He stated thoughtfully, is anything else you wish to report, Captain? The ninja seemed to shuffle nervously from foot to foot before he took another glance at the plain masked ninja before shaking his head. No, Hokage-sama, he said. In truth, he wanted to scream out at the old man. What he had seen had not been a fight, it had been a massacre. The bodies of all the enemy ninja were practically ripped to pieces or burnt to ash. Nothing but dust, bones and blood had remained of them. He was no stranger to death, and in the end, better than him. But it was unnerving. He knew who this boy was, and knew that what he'd seen today would only be the start of his strength. Should the dog ever come off its leash, none would be able to rein it in. Still, he would hold his tongue. Perhaps because, despite his brutal efficiency, he felt he owed this thing for ensuring all his men made it out safely. Or perhaps it was a mild respect. Or perhaps it was far more simple than that. Perhaps the most powerful emotion that held him back was the fear. Fear of the retribution the young fox would dish should he speak against him. Sarutobi nodded. Very well, you 6 may leave. Kaden, you stay. The designated men bowed before shuffling out of the room. Sarutobi looked to the last remaining Anbu in his office. Remove your mask, please. The short Anbu wordlessly removed his mask, revealing a blonde-haired boy with whisker-like birthmarks on his face along with the calm cold blues that were his eyes. He could be no older than 6. Sarutobi sighed sadly. His eyes had always been like that. Ever since he could remember, the boy was the embodiment of the perfect shinobi. The perfect tool. The perfect killing device. He hated the council for what they had done. They had left him with an ultimatum. Either he would be trained as Konoha's weapon or he would be executed. Sometimes he wished he had taken the second option. It seemed merciful in comparison to the empty void he now was. On par with Uchiha Itachi. Perhaps even colder. He sighed again. Now was not the time for this. Many in the council believed that training him like this had been the right call. Too many. No. He would wait, he would bide his time, and then he would set things right. Naruto, I understand that this was your first mission as an Anbu. Yes. The boy spoke. His voice was flat and even, no emotion could be heard in his voice or seen on his face. Sarutobi eyed him for a moment. Are you well? Sometimes Anbu-level missions affect people. How are you coping? Naruto mentally raised an eyebrow. He was confused by this. They were merely enemies that were interfering with our mission. I do not understand why you would believe this would affect me in any way. Sarutobi resisted the urge to sigh. This was so frustrating. It felt like he was half beating his head against the wall. It was sickening. Never mind, Naruto, he stated before standing. He looked at the boy for a moment, thinking, then he spoke. I have a meeting, to finalize the alliance with the Kazekage of Suna. You are to be my bodyguard. Naruto bowed his head. As you wish, he stated before placing his mask over his face. Sarutobi felt a pang in his chest at the sight. It was almost like that mask was consuming him. As if it would swallow his soul entirely every time he put it on. He hid his sadness, walked around his desk and out the door. Hokage Dono, the Kazekage greeted respectfully as he stood. I am pleased you have arrived, he said as he bowed his head. Sarutobi smiled and translated the words into non-political, human language. About time you showed up. Our Kazekage Dono, Forgive me for keeping you waiting. I had some urgent matters to attend to. Sarutobi spoke in that sage voice which indicated he wasn't really sorry at all. The Kazekage nodded tightly. He never did like these meetings, couldn't really bring himself to trust his so-called ally. He suddenly caught sight of Naruto's robed form emerging from the thin shadows in the corner. He wondered briefly when the Anbu had entered the room, and if there were more of them. Hokage Dono, I respectfully request that our guards remove their masks. He requested, eyeing the strange short Anbu suspiciously. Sarutobi nodded and turned his head to look at Naruto from the corner of his eye. The blonde raised his hand and removed the mask as the Kazekage's guard did the same. The Kazekage out of sheer curiosity looked straight at the Anbu as he removed his mask. He immediately regretted the action. Locking eyes with those cold blues, he found himself freezing, his gut churning with disquiet. Those eyes were dead. They showed absolutely nothing, no happiness, no sadness, no anger, not even cold indifference. Well then, shall we get down to business? Sarutobi's voice brought the Kazekage back to reality. He tore his gaze away and looked at the old man. Of course. He replied, giving a slight nod. Over the hours through the night they spoke over the details of the new treaty between their two countries and the conditions of the alliance for several hours before they finally came to a mutually satisfying agreement. It would be signed tomorrow officially, in a public display, before the Konoha Council, population and dignitaries from his own country of Wind. As the Kazekage stood in preparation to take his leave, Sarutobi stopped him. May I have a word in private, Kazekage Dono? The Suna leader hesitated for a moment before nodding. Their two guards accepted the silent command and bowed their heads before walking out of the room. Sarutobi suddenly sighed sadly as the blonde boy finally exited the room. Kazekage Dono, I know, of what Suna is planning. To create a weapon out of the Shukaku's Jinchuriki. The Kazekage stiffened, his spine going ramrod straight. Sarutobi looked straight into the Kazekage's eyes as he spoke his next words. I warn you now that if you follow through with this, you will regret it forever. The Kazekage's eyes immediately narrowed. Are you threatening me? Sarutobi sighed again, shaking his head. No, you may do as you wish, I assure you that it will not affect the alliance. It is just, he trailed off as he turned his head to face the door Naruto had used to exit the room. You have seen tonight, the results of such ambitions. The Kazekage's thought, then his eyes opened a bit more in realization. You mean that boy? Sarutobi nodded. Naruto is Konoha's attempt at a living weapon. We succeeded but, he trailed off slightly. But the price was too high. At least, I believe it was. He then turned to the Kazekage. Perhaps you might disagree. But if you find that you are wrong, could you live with that crime I wonder? As Sarutobi returned to his office he sat down in his chair with an exhausted sigh. His eyes landed on that familiar mask. You may go Naruto, he said, his voice laced with weariness and his face showed his true age. Naruto inclined his head in a short bow. As you wish, he said, before he turned sharply on his heel and walked out the door. Sarutobi's face twisted in grief after the boy left. It always did. The guilt and anger he felt always gnawed on his insides. The eve after Kyuubi's devastating attack 6 years ago tore at his heart. Ate away at him. It hurt just to look at the boy. To see the results of his cowardice. The civilians wanted him dead, the council wanted a weapon and the dying wish of their savior was left, forgotten in the wake of fear, hate, and ambition. Again, he wondered if it would have been better to have let the civilians have their way. No, he admonished himself as he shook his head. There was still time to save him. Death was finite, life would always provide possibilities at some point. Somehow he would find a way to undo this. The walk back to Suna seemed to lag on forever to the Kazekage. He longed to see the walls of his home again. But the trip had also given him ample time to think, and reflect upon his actions. Mainly, his actions against his son Gaara. The death of his wife at childbirth was an unforeseen consequence on his part. The priest, who had also died sealing the sand demon, had assured him that the only way for the sealing to succeed was for the beast to be sealed while she was in labor. He was never informed that his wife would die from the ritual. Filled with grief and rage over his wife's death, he had struggled to find an outlet and eventually he could only find one. Gaara. He had blamed Gaara for his late wife's death and had even cursed his very existence. He vowed to himself that he would cut the family bond of father and son, and that he would turn Gaara into what the Suna village needed him to be. He had almost succeeded in that endeavor. The boy was always alone, always at arm's length from everyone, even his siblings. But now, seeing the living result of such ambitions in that boy from Konoha had truly shook his resolve. No matter what he said, or what he had done, Gaara was still his son. Could he bear turning Gaara's innocent green eyes into the same cold lifeless hue of that boy's? Could he turn Gaara into what others had been calling him since he was born? A monster. About a week ago his answer would have been easy. But now he truly didn't know. He had seen a glimpse of the future. And he did not like what he had seen. Ah, Kazekage-sama. A servant spoke as the Suna leader entered his estate. It is good to see you have returned. We were beginning to worry. He spoke as he bowed lowly. Where is Gaara? Was the first thing that escaped his mouth. The servant looked up, startled at the question. It was very rare for the Kazekage to ever make any mention of his son unless there were reports that he had killed someone else in the village. He is in his room, my lord. Shall I go fetch him? He asked rather uncertainly, afraid. No one wanted to go near Gaara. No. The Kazekage spoke tightly. With a flare of his robe he turned sharply on his heel and walked down the hallway towards his son's room. As he approached he felt his steps heavy, the clack of his shoes against the wooden floor echoing off the halls. He looked to Gaara's oak wood door and opened it without knocking. And there he was, sitting in the middle of his room, hugging the old worn teddy bear he's had since he was a baby. A gift from his mother, the Suna leader reflected sadly as he recalled his wife buying the toy when she was still pregnant with him. As Gaara turned and caught sight of him, he saw the turquoise eyes widen in fear. The Kazekage didn't know how, but he would fix this. He would undo the wrongs he had committed upon his son and perhaps someday. Gaara, he called. He saw the boy flinch as if struck, an act that sent a pang of something that took him a moment to recognize as guilt through his chest. Come here, boy. Gaara stood and walked over, his eyes meekly down to the floor. He sighed and moved a hand to touch the top of the boy's head when sand emerged and stopped him. Gaara looked up fearfully. Every time his father saw any form of resistance from Gaara he would always get angry. But he couldn't control it, he didn't know how. The Kazekage sighed heavily as he pulled back, allowing the sand to dissipate. Gaara looked up, for a moment before diverting his eyes. The Kazekage sighed again. Gaara, look at me, he said to the young redhead who raised his head to look into his father's eyes. The Kazekage stared into his son's eyes for several moments before he spoke. I'm sorry. The simple words seemed to have the force of a thunderclap in Gaara's mind and his eyes visibly showed his confusion. The Kazekage stared at his son's eyes, seeing them change, become sharper, colder, no longer the eyes of a boy, and it sent a chill down his spine. I'll make things right, he said to his son's confusion before he turned and left the room. It was late in the village of Konoha when two Anbu from the village of Iwa infiltrated the city undetected. They moved swiftly, slipping past patrols, sifting through the shadows, disarming traps, undoing seals and safety measures easily. The goal, the forbidden scroll. As the two slipped through the hallways, finally entering the chamber with the large marble stand that held the scroll, they took a few minutes to make sure there were no traps. Key. These Konoha are so stupid, I can't believe they would leave the scroll in such an obvious spot. One Anbu mocked in disgust as he walked forward. Just shut up and grab the damn thing, our bribe mentioned the shift change ends in another minute. His partner hissed harshly as he kept watch on the door. The Anbu snorted as he walked forward. With another quick check for traps he pulled the scroll from its berth and hefted it onto his back. He turned around to his partner and smirked, missing the dark shadow with a black mask that emerged like a specter from the darkest nightmares behind him. Slowly the thing unsheathed two wickedly curved scimitars, one in a reverse grip in his left hand while the other held normally on his right. Hey, piece of cake. The Anbu scoffed, making his partner turn to him. His eyes immediately widened in alarm. Behind you, he called as he moved to run towards him. The other, by sheer instinct alone, ducked, narrowly avoiding a swing that would have taken his head off. He pivoted on his heel and prepared to face his attacker. But before he could get a good look of anything other than the mask and Anbu clothing, he felt the air in his lungs leave as a crushing kick connected with his chest. Sickening snaps echoed off the wooden walls of the room as his ribs cracked and broke from the hard impact. He felt bile and blood escape his mouth as he soared across the room towards the far wall. The Anbu that had been keeping watch by the door made a dive to catch his comrade and felt the air leave him as well as he did. He planted his feet firmly on the ground and used chakra to stick. He was astonished that even with doing so he still skidded a few feet before coming to a stop. He placed his comrade down and checked him. The spectre watched the scene with apathy. He slowly began walking towards them. His gait steady, even and sure. The Anbu he had previously kicked coughed up blood and clutched his chest in pain. The other Anbu turned and unsheathed his sword before charging. The spectre fluidly positioned his blades before he began spinning while simultaneously moving forward. His attacks fluidly coming in high and low. The Iwa Anbu, caught off guard by the strange maneuver, didn't know how to defend properly, so he swerved to the side. The thing stopped as he saw his target move. The Iwa Anbu took his cease in momentum and delivered a sharp kick to the fox ninja's face. It took the blow without even flinching, its face barely moving an inch. Then it turned to look at his stunned opponent before straightening and beginning his onslaught again. The Iwa Anbu again turned to the side, but the Konoha creature knew he would do so and turned the blade he had in his left hand so he could trust. And as he spun again he dug in his heel, and before the Iwa Anbu could understand what was going on, the ghost thing stabbed his blade dead center into the man's chest, the wicked blade coming out the other side. The Iwa Anbu coughed blood before he looked into the ninja's mask, through the slits of the eye holes, and felt his breath stolen in quiet horror. Those eyes, those empty cold pits of ice, stared straight back into his own unflinchingly. He let out a final gasp before the spectre swung his other sword and lobbed off his head with a sickening slice. The other Anbu watched with terrified eyes as his comrade fell, the stink of blood and evacuation of death quickly spreading through the room. His fear-filled gaze towards the looming, ominous form that was now slowly turning towards him, like a dark malevolent evil that had now set its sights on him. The blood dripping slowly off his blades, the crimson fox mask shining in the dim light were the only things truly visible, making him all the more terrifying. He shakily took the scroll off from his back, ignoring the aches in his chest. He extended it forward with shaking hands. Take it. He stuttered, throwing the scroll. The thing fluidly sheathed its blade and caught the scroll, before placing it down and continuing his walk towards the Iwa Nin. The ninja's eyes widened before he swiftly got to his feet, fear and adrenaline numbing the pain in his chest as he tossed smoke bombs onto the floor, sending a blanket of gray across the room. Then he rushed to the open window and made a move to leap through it, but the cold metal of a gauntlet wrapped around his throat and slammed him against the wall, holding him firmly 3 feet above the ground. He coughed and gasped, latching onto the Konoha Anbu's wrist in a futile attempt to remove the appendage from his person. The spectre watched the man squirm for a moment before he positioned his blade to strike and went in for the kill. Enough, Naruto. Naruto's blade stopped. Sarutobi, Ibiki, Kakashi and a squad of Anbu emerged from the shadows. The aged Hokage nodded to his interrogator. Take the prisoner for interrogation. I trust you have our mole in custody as well. Ibiki nodded, of course. With a snap of his fingers, 2 Konoha Anbu stepped forward and grabbed his shoulders as Naruto released him. They began dragging him away, Ibiki following closely behind. Naruto slowly sheathed his blade and turned to face Sarutobi. Your orders, Hokage-sama. He spoke, his voice coming out in a deep baritone due to a voice-changing device in his mask so as not to be recognized by his voice whenever he was off duty, which was almost never. Sarutobi sighed. Nothing, Naruto. You may leave. The young Anbu elite bowed his head slightly before turning on his heel and vanishing in a swirl of smoke. Sarutobi sighed again as he turned to Kakashi. Come, Kakashi. He ordered before he too left the bloodied scroll room, Kakashi following close behind. Moments later the two found themselves in Sarutobi's office. The old Hokage sighed as he removed his hat and plopped down on his chair. He looked older then. Kakashi waited as he leaned against the wall, his book nowhere to be seen for once, as he stared at the Hokage, patiently observing. Sarutobi rubbed his forehead tiredly before he raised his eyes to look at Kakashi. Well, he began. What do you think? Effective. Kakashi said, nodding slightly. His fighting stance and execution is near flawless from what I can tell, his precision and coordination is on the money and his general speed is impressive. Sarutobi leaned forward on his desk. What do you really think? Kakashi paused. Off the record. Permission to speak freely, Hokage-sama? He asked after a few seconds. Sarutobi nodded. Permission granted. The copy nin stated simply with a light shrug. I know the circumstances you faced that day, death, or living servitude, but to take it to such an extreme, that boy. He paused to gather the right words. Is more thing than man. Sarutobi sighed and leaned on his desk as he buried his face in his hands. That is why I want to undo the damage. The council has recently lost a number of members that fervently supported the idea of him as a weapon, and more open-minded individuals have taken the place. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. And you're telling me this because? He drawled. Sarutobi met his gaze with a spark of determination burning within his eyes. Because you will be assisting me. Kakashi raised both eyebrows. And how do you propose I do that? Sarutobi stood from his chair and walked to the balcony, lighting his pipe as he did so. He took a puff and slowly let the smoke out of his lungs. Uchiha Sasuke's Genin exam is coming up soon, is it not? Along with that of Hyuga Hinata. He half-asked, half-stated. Kakashi's eyes widened in alarm. He moved forward and stood in front of the Hokage, shaking his head furiously. No. No. No way. Sarutobi took a puff of his pipe and blinked lazily at his younger subordinate. What is the matter, Kakashi? It'll never work for one thing. He yelled, flailing his arms around somewhat frantically. And why not? The older ninja asked calmly. You're planning on putting something like that with 2 genin. The copy nin recited dryly. That would be like sticking a wolf dog in a sheep den and then being surprised when half the sheep wind up dead the next morning. Sarutobi stared straight into Kakashi's eyes, unflinchingly. I have already failed Minato once, Kakashi. I have a chance to make it right and I refuse to let it pass me by. You will help me, he bit out in a tone that Kakashi really didn't want to hear again. The copy nin sighed. He knew he was gonna regret this. Naruto slowly walked towards his home. It was a large estate hidden just on the eastern side of the village outskirts. The person that had built the estate was apparently a nature lover, for he had cut down almost no trees and had apparently chosen a natural clearing in which to build the main house. Other areas of the estate, such as the dojo, armory and library, were built on the tree itself, or around it. Giant tree houses, really. Naruto truly believed this home was simply far too lavish for someone such as himself. He had asked the Hokage only once why he had given him this estate and had received a confusing answer. It's the least I can do. And the aged man had left it at that. Naruto did not understand what the old man was apparently trying to repay. He did his duty, nothing more, nothing less. Quietly he passed the gate into the grounds, dry and rotting leaves scattered in the wind, filling the night air with their soft crinkling melody. Calm was hardly his companion, but in his home he found that he could encounter it every now and again, rare as it could be. His first memories were of blood and death, instructors, drilling in the shinobi rules, laws and disciplines for hours on end until he could recite each and every one of them by memory perfectly. Training his fighting style, shuriken and kunai throwing, weapons, focus and chakra control training. All his life was bent around the sole purpose of fighting. To the servitude of the Hokage. Only the one who holds that title could command him, and he would immediately dispatch any other that tried to command him more than once. Over the years he had seen other children his age that lived and enjoyed their lives. He had never spared them a second glance, he had never questioned why they lived one life while he lived another. To him, it was simply the way of things. He would never hesitate, never question, never stop. He was the perfect weapon. You summoned me, Hokage-sama. Came Naruto's altered voice from the balcony doorway. Sarutobi steeled his features and turned to face the young boy. Now in the morning sun one could truly get a good look at him. One could tell the boy had been trained from birth. The council had governed everything in his life until just recently, even food consumption. His diet was literally the healthiest thing Sarutobi had ever seen. Thus he had grown, making it to a height of 5 feet 7, which is tall for the age of 12. He had his 2 swords crisscrossing along his back. The black cloak, which was specifically designed for the Anbu so it would not reflect light, was slightly parted, revealing a custom Anbu armor which was red in color with 2 shoulder plates which made him seem much more broad, thus increasing his intimidation factor. After all, psychology often won the battle before it was even fought. Sarutobi tilted his hat. I have a new mission for you, Naruto. Naruto bowed his head. Whatever you ask, I shall serve. No. Wait to hear it before you accept. He demanded, hoping the boy would question him for once. As you know, 6 years ago Uchiha Itachi committed what is known as the Uchiha Massacre. Because of this, Uchiha Sasuke is the last remaining Uchiha. You also know that almost a decade ago Kumo attempted to kidnap Hyuga Hinata in an attempt to steal the secrets of the Byakugan. We have reason to believe that both of these children will be targeted in the near future. Therefore they must be protected. Well, it wasn't a complete lie. Kumo could go after Hinata again. Sarutobi sighed. The council and I, he lied, have decreed that you are to be their bodyguard. You are to go undercover as a genin under the tutelage of Hatake Kakashi. Do you accept? I understand if you choose to refuse. Whatever you ask, I shall serve. The young Jinchuriki spoke without an ounce of hesitation. Sarutobi sighed a little in disappointment before he nodded. I shall send one of my Kunoiki to your estate in order to help you acquire attire for your mission. Sarutobi knew for a fact that the only thing Naruto possessed in his closet were cloaks and pieces of Anbu armor. The boy had nothing else, so it was highly unlikely he would know anything about normal civilian wear, since that is what most genin wore. Will I be allowed to keep my weapons? The blonde Anbu asked. Sarutobi paused. This was the first time Naruto had seemingly placed any value on any object. Given, weapons were a shinobi's best friend, but still, it was better than nothing. He nodded slowly. You may. Naruto nodded and bowed before he exited the office. Sarutobi sighed as the boy left. Every time he saw those cold blues or that damn mask, he was filled with so many regrets it hurt. Soon enough the doors opened and his secretary walked in. You called Hokage-sama? She asked politely. Sarutobi nodded. Bring me Yuhi Kurenai, please. Yuhi Kurenai was known as many things in life. The Genjutsu Mistress, the Ice Queen, and a myriad of other nicknames that she would not list out. Still, despite her reputation, it had only been a few months since she had become a Junin. Nevertheless, even having only been privy to the rumors that circled among the Junin for such a relatively short amount of time, she had managed to get right in the center of the gossip network of Konoha. So it was no surprise that she was nervous as hell as she continued to walk towards the home of the mysterious Anbu that was only known as the Demon. The rumors about this strange and dangerous Anbu ran rampant in the Junin lounge. Stories of how his eyes would freeze your very soul in fear, of how he could single-handedly destroy entire regiments of enemy squads, of how he created flames that could burn the very flesh off your bones. The shinobi worth 1,000 was only one of his alleged names. Possibly the most exaggerated was the claim that he could not be killed. Exaggerated or not, however, she wasn't planning on testing it. So yes, Yuhi Kurenai was very nervous. As the dense foliage finally gave way, she gasped at the sight of the strangely designed yet beautiful estate. She half expected for the elusive Anbu to live in some secluded cave with torchlights along the entrance. Before she could look around any more, a commanding voice spoke to her right. Are you the Kunoiki the Hokage sent? She turned and gulped as she caught sight of a black faceplate mask. She slowly nodded to his question. Still, she knew that Konoha's demon was no ordinary Anbu. His voice, she could tell, was mechanically altered to be deeper than it naturally was. He was short, and his body structure, though somewhat obscured by the cloak, was not that of a fully mature man. It was more that of a child. Konoha's demon was a child. Naruto, seeing her nod to his previous question, nodded in return before he turned back on his heel. Then come. The Hokage stated that you would assist me in acquiring clothing that genin normally wear. Kurenai nodded, but wondered just why the hell he couldn't do this himself. Is something wrong? Kurenai asked as she saw him staring at the civilian clothing oddly. This clothing has no armor plating between the fabrics, neither does it possess kunai and shuriken holsters to hide weapons. He stated in a confused tone as he turned to her with a raised eyebrow showing his confusion. Not that she could tell with the mask still in place. Kurenai refrained from narrowing her eyes in annoyance and decided to speak. Forgive me, but it's rather, strange talking with you while you have that mask on. Would you mind removing it for now? She asked. Naruto paused for a moment. It was odd, now that he thought about it, only Sarutobi had, truly, seen his unmasked face. And the Kazekage during a meeting a few years ago, but the man had probably forgotten, and one other time during a mission where his mask had shattered along the left side, revealing his sharp blue eye to the captain. One Hatake Kakashi, if he remembered correctly, had seen just that one part of his face, but that was about it. He hesitated for a few more moments before he slowly nodded his consent, and with a soft click his mask was removed, revealing his stark blonde hair and whisker-marked face. The baby fat that would have normally been present to some degree on a boy his age was completely gone, revealing angular features. Kurenai sucked in a breath. He was young. He was just a kid. She'd figured he'd be 15, maybe 16, but the face she was seeing was a boy's. To think that the Hokage, her village, could allow something like this, it was almost nauseating. She knew, of course, there were many young people that were extremely powerful shinobi, but she'd thought her village was better than a place like Kiri. Uchiha Itachi had been their last example, and look where that had gotten them. Is something wrong? Naruto's voice brought her out of her stupor. It was still flat and emotionless, but much less foreboding without the voice-altering device in the mask. She shook her head. No, nothing's wrong. These are civilian clothes. Many genin wear them since none of the truly serious missions begin until they're chunin. So it's not really necessary to have hidden kunai pouch or armor beneath the fabrics. Naruto nodded. It was logical, really. He turned back to the clothes rack and continued shifting through it. What form of clothing would you recommend? He asked after a few moments. Which ones do you like? She asked after a moment. I have never had any need for any other clothing besides armor. I am uncertain what colors are common amongst genin of the village. He stated simply. Kurenai had to hold back from gaping at him. But didn't you have clothes like this when you were younger? She asked incredulously. I have been in Anbu uniform for as long as I can remember. If I did possess civilian clothing at some point, I do not recall the time. He stated as he turned to her. Is something wrong? You are quite red. Kurenai was indeed red. Her fists were clenched tightly. It was common knowledge that children at the age of 12 could, most of the time, easily recall events as far back as 4 to 5 years. For him to have no recollection of ever having civilian clothing, then that meant that the Hokage had placed him in the Anbu when he was 7, 6, or perhaps even younger. She didn't know of anyone anywhere that had joined Anbu that young. Indeed, the standing of the Hokage had in her mind was dropping rapidly. She shook her head and took a deep breath in order to calm herself. All right, she breathed out after a moment. Well, I guess we'll be starting from scratch. It had taken a while, much longer than what Naruto had anticipated, but eventually they had settled on some clothes. Mostly dark colors. She'd been able to convince him on 1 or 2 pieces that were not black, but it would have been easier to pull teeth, really. Still, Naruto throughout the day had felt quite, in a way, vulnerable without the familiar weight of his mask. And the sound of his unaltered voice disturbed him. How long had it been since he had heard his own voice? He couldn't remember. So it was with great care that he had left Kurenai to go to a weapons shop where he had acquired a metallic face mask that covered the lower half of his face. As he returned to his estate, he had carefully dismantled his Anbu mask and had removed the voice-altering device and had placed it on his new metallic one. Just behind the grill mouth design. His own voice without it was just too unfamiliar for his taste. A testament to just how long he had been using the device. He set aside his new attire and sharpened his twin scimitars. Then took the files of his 2 clients and shifted through them for a few moments before he quietly went to sleep. Kurenai stomped up the stairs of the Hokage Tower, seething quietly. The very air seemed to cackle around her and no one dared to bar her path, even the Anbu guards at the Hokage's door. They didn't have the balls to try and stop her, maybe Orochimaru, or Itachi, but an angry Yuhi Kurenai, no chance in hell. She threw the doors open, ignoring the ruckus she made, and glared at the old man that casually puffed his pipe. Seemingly uncaring at the anger directed at him. Mission accomplished, Hokage-sama. She spat out the title like acid, lacing her words with venom. Sarutobi puffed his pipe. Are you angry at me for doing what I must? He asked flatly. She clenched her fists and glared at him, her ruby-red eyes shining with fiery fury. She didn't speak, she merely turned and walked out of the room and slammed the door shut, making both Anbu cringe. Sarutobi felt a smile tug at his lips as he watched her leave. Perhaps gaining support for the blonde Jinchuriki would not be as difficult as he once believed. Yumi no Iruka was rarely surprised. Having seen and heard some of the most far-fetched and ridiculous excuses from his students, as well as having been the victim of several pranks caused by said students, allowed him to develop a form of sixth sense to any and all forms of surprises. However, he highly doubted that even with 20 more years in the teaching business could have prepared him for what the Hokage was telling him right now. Hell, 20 years in the Anbu might not have even remotely prepared him for this. In his classroom, stood the Sandaime Hokage and a young boy, whose face was obscured by a metal mask. But that wasn't the surprising part. No. The surprising part was what they were saying. The Hokage apparently had a second Uchiha Itachi hidden away in the Anbu Black Ops and now wanted to place him in a class of genin to act as an undercover bodyguard for Uchiha Sasuke and Hyuga Hinata. In the face of this, Iruka could only say one simple thing. Are you insane? The Hokage took a puff of his pipe. No, Iruka, I am many things, but insane is not one of them. He replied calmly. Iruka blushed in embarrassment as he realized just what he'd just let slip out to the Hokage. Sarutobi took another puff of his pipe before he spoke. Grant him the genin test, Iruka, he will pass, no matter what his score. You will place him on the team with Uchiha Sasuke and Hyuga Hinata. This is the course of action the council and I have come to agree upon, he said before turning on his heel and marching out the door. His new student following him quietly. Iruka stood with his mouth slightly gaping before he sighed and plopped down on his chair. He knew that this was going to be a long day. Hitaki Kakashi was normally not easily intimidated. Years spent as the Anbu captain had given him a great number of immunities to almost any form of intimidation. However, seeing as how he had the heir of the Hyuga clan, the last remaining Uchiha and most importantly Konoha's most dangerous Anbu, the demon, waiting for him, he decided that he should arrive on time. Which is why he currently found himself here. In Ibiki's interrogation cell. Now for the last time, what have you done with Hitaki Kakashi? Ibiki asked in a dangerous tone. Oh, for fuck's sake, I am Kakashi. He yelled for what seemed like the 100th time in 20 minutes. He's not cracking, sir. A Chunin whispered in Ibiki's ear. I know. Ibiki whispered back. But we have to keep at it. Kakashi sighed. It was going to be a long day. Uchiha Sasuke scowled as he glared at the mysterious new arrival that had been placed on his genin team. Iruka was slightly taller than the boy, but even so, his ominous presence towered over the Chunin teacher. His other teammate was at least familiar. Hyuga Hinata was a member of the Hyuga main house, and had all of her insecurities and shy feelings of hesitation furiously stomped out of her by years of living under the iron fist of her father. She was cold and calculative and had nearly taken the title of Rookie of the Year from him during one time they had sparred at practice. She was practically the only girl their age that did not fawn over him. All in all, he counted himself lucky that he had gotten someone that was useful on his team. The same, however, could not be said about their sensei. The man was approximately 20 minutes late and it was starting to grate on his nerves. Hinata calmly sat at her desk, her eyes studying the strange new student that had arrived. She would never admit it, never in a million years, but when she had seen him fight during the taijutsu portion of the exam, she had activated her Byakugan. The sight had shocked her. His body was literally a web of inner chakra coils, he had nearly double the normal number of tenketsu and his chakra had hints of red in it, all things that were almost entirely unheard of. It was not entirely unknown for someone with a great deal of chakra to have a few more tenketsu than normal. The Yondaime himself was said to have possessed roughly 30 extra tenketsu. But still to have so many at such a young age was staggering. His coils were also thicker than normal. She had no urges to face him. Even if it was just a friendly spar. She had let none of her shock or unease show on her features and remained as apathetic as possible. Naruto meanwhile stood, staring out the window, still as a statue. He could feel and smell the unease radiating off of his two teammates from his presence. It was nothing new, in fact, he was kind of impressed they were holding up so well. Anbu on missions with him had been radiating fear through their eye sockets. Then again, these children knew nothing of his reputation. He watched the leaves fall in the wind, waiting for Kakashi to arrive. He knew the Junin would not show up for quite a while, but his clients were here, so he would remain here. 5.5 hours later, however, Naruto was seriously considering marching out of the classroom and personally dragging the one-eyed, smut-reading Junin back here personally. All his thoughts of possibly disabling the copycat ended as he heard the door slide open, revealing a very angry-looking Kakashi with a vicious twitch of his eyebrow. Meet on the roof, he ground out before vanishing in a puff of smoke. Sasuke and Hinata sent glares filled with barely contained rage as they each thought of various ways they could harm their new sensei. Naruto said nothing as he slowly turned from the window and walked out the door to walk up to the roof in order to meet his old captain. Kakashi's eye continued to twitch terribly and his face was set in a stone-cold glare, directed just above his students' heads as two of them sat there. Their fury had been a cold breeze in comparison to his. It hadn't taken them long to realize that, so now they shifted a little nervously while the other just stared on impassively. His mind continued to replay the events of his morning. That is officially the last time he was going to show up even remotely early. They had checked his eyes, his ears, took his blood, his fingerprints, his dental records, an X-ray and a sample of his bodily fluids. But the worst of all had been the cavity search. A thrice damned cavity search, for crying out loud. He didn't even know what could be used in a cavity search to identify someone. He took a deep breath to calm himself down and was about to speak when the Uchiha spoke first. Why were you late? Kakashi's eyes lit up with the most unholy fire from the very depths of hell and glared at Sasuke with such intensity even Naruto took a slight step back. Introduce yourselves. He practically snarled. Start with your likes, dislikes and dreams for the future. Naruto could have sworn that his normally black eye had flashed red in the form of the Mangekyo for a brief moment. Hinata was the first to recover from the intimidation and managed to speak up. My name is Hyuga Hinata, I enjoy training, I dislike weak main house Hyugas that abuse branch members. She said, thinking of certain old rotting bastards that were on the Hyuga council that could barely lift themselves even as they flaunted the feeling of power they held over the branch house slavery. If it was one thing her father had not been able to beat out of her, it was her utter hatred for the caged bird seal. Her dream was to defeat her father, gain the title of clan head and immediately remove the caged bird seal from all branch members, repercussions be damned. Kakashi nodded. My name is Uchiha Sasuke. I don't like many things and I hate a lot of things. My dream is more of an ambition. To kill a certain man. Kakashi's single eye narrowed. Should have expected that, he thought, not saying anything. Naruto, however, had different thoughts to his mission as the old man's words passed through his mind again. You are to go undercover as a genin in order to guard Uchiha Sasuke and Hyuga Hinata. The council and I have decreed that you are the best one to protect them. Sarutobi's orders were to protect them. If Sasuke went after Itachi, it would prove to be quite counterproductive to that goal. Therefore he had to eliminate such delusions here and now. You do not have the experience, the power, or the skill to even have a hope of matching Itachi. You would be destroyed in an instant. Sasuke snapped his head around and glared at Naruto standing up from his seat on the steps and staring up at the taller blonde. What did you say? He hissed with such venom most would have cringed in fear. Naruto, however, was unfazed, sounding quite bored as he stated simple facts. You do not have the power to stand against someone such as he. Your ambition, such as it is merely a delusion, born from your hate and fueled by foolish pride. Kakashi winced. Naruto was about as subtle as a hammer to the face. Sasuke's eyes flashed and his rage was almost a palpable thing as he was about to move forward. Kakashi appeared between the two. That's enough, he said, looking at both of them. Sasuke silently seethed while Naruto remained apathetic. Hinata looked at the exchange with a critical eye before silently shrugging. If Sasuke wanted to fight him, she sure as hell wasn't about to say anything. Kakashi, while still remaining between the two, turned to Naruto. Your introduction, please, he said. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, that is all you need to know. He said simply. Kakashi's eye twitched again. I got the two of the biggest egos in Konoha, and Konoha's living weapon as my genin squad. I hate my life. He let none of his displeasure show in his face and merely sighed. Tomorrow, you are all going to have the real genin test. There is a 66% chance of failure. If you fail, you'll be going straight back into the academy. Hinata and Sasuke looked shocked, yet Naruto still looked apathetic. Before the other two could speak, Kakashi hurriedly spoke, not wanting to deal with the normally amusing faces the genin made when he said that, today. Remember, it's training area 7. Don't eat breakfast tomorrow or you'll puke. He said before vanishing in a puff of smoke. The three youths stood for a few moments before Sasuke, emphed, and left, his two teammates. Hinata watched the raven-haired boys retreat before turning her pale lavender eyes onto the last, masked member of the team. He was already walking away. She eyed him for a moment or two before he vanished in a puff of smoke. Sarutobi calmly puffed his pipe and sat in his chair as the roars of the outraged council members washed over his ears. Specifically the older generation of council members that had yet to retire, or die. What were you thinking, Sarutobi, placing that monstrosity with both heirs of the greatest clans of Konoha? Why would you even place him in a genin cell to begin with? That monster needs to do what it was meant to do, complete suicide missions until it dies. One female member spoke up her opinion. Sarutobi took a deep puff of his pipe in order to calm his raging emotions. Sometimes he just wanted to take a kunai and pull an Itachi. God knows he could do it. Naruto on his own was just as strong, if not stronger than him was, and 2 cage-level nins were more than enough to kill off a few crippled and decrepit council members. He showed nothing of this, however, and spoke in a calm, simple way. Lady Arito, I suggest you hold your tongue. I may be old, but I am still the Hokage of this village. I have placed Uzumaki Naruto in the Genin team consisting of Uchiha Sasuke, Hyuga Hinata and Hatake Kakashi because recent information has come to me indicating that attempts may be made on the lives of Uchiha Sasuke and or Hyuga Hinata. Naruto is the best one to guard them, since he is one of our top Anbu, and it is very likely that the attempts will be made outside of the village when they are on missions. The council were reduced to simply muttering to themselves since they were willing to do anything to protect the clan heirs of the 2 most important bloodlines in Konoha. Finally, one Homura stood. Very well, Sarutobi. However, once Uchiha Sasuke and Hyuga Hinata reach the rank of Chunin, Uzumaki Naruto should be returned directly to the front lines. Sarutobi's features tightened and he nodded, standing up and walking out of the room. That is what you think, Homura. I let this injustice pass once, I swear it will not happen again. Hinata and Sasuke arrived at the training ground, both still trying to rub the sleep out of their eyes. The sun was just barely peeking over the mountains as the early morning fog began to dissipate. They both caught sight of the 3rd teammate, standing silent as a specter in the shadow beneath one of the trees waiting for them. He turned his head in the direction, barely nodding in greeting. The 2 Genins each walked forward and sat down. No one exchanged a word as they waited for Kakashi to arrive. Eventually Sasuke and Hinata fell asleep again, trying to catch those last few seconds of rest while Naruto remained awake. Silent as the dead. It was several hours later that Kakashi showed up in his signature puff of smoke. Oyaho, he greeted. You are late, Hatake, came Naruto's voice in a flat tone which held a distinct edge of annoyance in it. Kakashi waved his hand dismissively. Ma, I'm not late, you're just early. He stopped the nonsense as Naruto turned and glared, clearly irritated. He cleared his throat before he made 2 hand seals which formed 2 small streams of water that hit Sasuke and Hinata in the face, startling them awake. Kakashi held in his mirth at their startled expressions but let a chuckle escape his lips at their mutual death glares. God, he loved these moments. When it looked like the 2 clan heirs were about to get up and wring his neck, he immediately took out his 2 bells and his alarm clock. Now then, the purpose of this test is simple. In order to pass, you must simply take a bell from me, before time runs out. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. In case you haven't noticed, Kakashi, you only brought 2 bells. Your powers of observation continue to serve you well, Sasuke. Kakashi said happily as his eye curved upwards in an upside-down U. Then that means that one will automatically fail. Hinata asked incredulously. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the cycloptic Junin. What are you up to, Hatake? Kakashi cleared his throat, ready. A slight pause. Begin. He yells before vanishing in a black and silver blur. Sasuke and Hinata rush off to hide, not knowing where their sensei has vanished, while Naruto vanishes in his own blur to follow the copy nin, having able to follow his form rather easily. A few moments later, Kakashi and Naruto stand in a clearing. The former reading his orange book, though most of his attention was on the living weapon. I am impressed, Hatake, Naruto says slowly, making Kakashi's single visible eye turn to him. Oh, are you now? What did I do to impress you so? Using an exercise that shows the Genin they may one day have to sacrifice themselves for the sake of their assigned mission. I did not think one such as you would enact such a test. Kakashi narrowed his eyes slightly. Even though the test is centered around personal sacrifice, it is for one man to sacrifice themselves for the sake of their teammates, not for the sake of the mission. This time it was Naruto who narrowed his eyes, though only in curiosity. You do realize, Hatake, that in the shinobi world, the mission is what counts, not your teammates. Kakashi kept his cool facade. It saddened and angered him somewhat that the legacy of his sensei, the man who put the lives of his fellow shinobi above all else, had been turned into this drone that was imbued with the stagnant, foolish beliefs of the old shinobi ways. Still, perhaps he could bend the truth to suit his needs. A great man once told me, those who break the rules are trash, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than trash. He quoted his old teammate yet again. Naruto remained impassive. Then he was a foolish idealist. The law of the shinobi is quite clear. The mission comes first. I would think the disgrace your father suffered would have taught you the price of such idealism. Kakashi's grip tightened on his book as he reined in his temper. He had insulted both Obito and his father. Were he anyone else, the boy would be in a great deal of pain right now. Crippling pain. He took a deep breath and calmed his temper. He knows no better. This is precisely what we want to undo. I cannot hold him responsible. He looked back up at the boy. Well, Naruto, do you know who it was that told me that? Obviously not, Naruto said. Kakashi smirked. It was the Yondaime Hokage of Konoha. Not exactly true, but perhaps it would serve to shake some of that conviction of the shinobi law out of him. He saw him stiffen and knew that his ploy had the effect of at least surprising him. Naruto indeed felt surprise. The greatest ninja the world had ever known carried such a philosophy. He stiffened for a moment before he relaxed again, shaking his head. It matters little unless who says it. The words are false. Kakashi narrowed his eyes. Apparently this was going to be harder than he thought. Even if the greatest of all shinobi hold that same philosophy. The Hokages were under the strongest ninjas of the village. Each of them had one thing in common. The desire to protect, to defend their people. They are shields, not swords, Naruto. What does the shinobi law state about that? Naruto unsheathed one of his blades calmly and took up his stance. It is Kage's sworn duty to lead, guide and protect his village, therefore, they are merely following their own mission and orders. While we follow ours, he stated simply. Kakashi resisted the urge to pull at his hair in frustration. This was gonna be a lot harder than what he first thought. Now, I believe there are 2 bells I must take from you. Came the blonde's altered voice. Kakashi barely had time to put his book away and lift his forehead protector before he was forced to leap away in order to avoid a sword swipe to his midsection. As he moved through the air, he took out a scroll and unrolled it. Seconds later, an Anbu blade poofed into existence. The copy nin caught the blade just as he landed on the ground and in one fluid motion placed it just in time to block Naruto's scimitar. The 2 blades met with a loud clang, and Kakashi nearly lost his grip on his blade due to the force Naruto had put behind it. He hid it though and glared at the blonde. You think you can get these bells before time runs out, Naruto? I may have been out of the Anbu Corps for a good 6 years now, but don't think you can just beat me outright. Naruto pulled his blade back before swinging again, batting Kakashi's blade away. He then tried to punch the copy nin in the face with his left. Kakashi caught his wrist with his right hand and tried to swipe at the blonde's midsection from right to left with his left hand. Naruto leapt up, over the blade. As he came down, Kakashi tried to come in with a follow-up swing. However, now that the blade was on Naruto's right side, the blonde was able to turn the scimitar in his right hand so it was held in a reverse grip and blocked the former Anbu captain's swipe. The living weapon then shoved Kakashi away, making the man lose his footing slightly. He yanked his left hand out of the man's grip and swiftly came with a roundhouse kick that would have connected solidly with Kakashi's face had the copy ninja not seen it coming with his Sharingan and managed to put up a last-minute defense. Naruto's kick still broke through the hastily placed guard, but it had lost all strength in it and did little significant damage. Kakashi rolled with the hit and gave a quick spin which ended with an attempted backhand to Naruto's face, but the blonde blocked it and then threw Kakashi over his shoulder. The copy nin flipped in mid-air and landed on his feet and charged at the blonde again. He came in with a fast upward swipe. Naruto back-flipped to avoid the swing and then sidestepped several times, narrowly avoiding the thrusts Kakashi sent towards his chest, the blade barely glancing his shoulders. In the trees, Sasuke and Hinata were watching the scene with wide disbelieving eyes. Their movements were so fast even Hinata, with the aid of the Byakugan, could barely keep up with them. Sasuke could barely catch a flash of silver before a swift clash of steel rang against steel again. The resounding metallic sounds coming in so swiftly it sometimes sounded as if they had only hit once. Finally the 2 shinobi leapt back. Kakashi, just slightly winded as he had not had the need to use such speed in a long time, while Naruto looked as immovable as ever, his constant use of such speed and power having conditioned his body to handle it easier. Naruto then straightened and with a few simple hand seals a gust of wind swooped in out of nowhere, carrying dead and rotting leaves from the nearby forest and fresh ones that had given way under the harsh wind. The leaves fluttered around them, swirling in a mini tornado that did little more than keep them in the air. Kakashi looked towards Naruto. He knew that the blonde was planning something. Whatever it was, he wasn't going to let this happen. He rushed forward and thrust his blade towards the blonde's chest, but just as his blade would have made contact, the blonde vanished out of existence, reappeared behind the copy nin and delivered a sharp elbow to the back of his head. Kakashi stumbled forward but regained his footing quickly and spun around, swinging his sword at the blonde, but again, Naruto vanished into thin air and appeared at Kakashi's side. The boy spun once before delivering a crushing swing with the blunt side of his scimitar to Kakashi's lower back. The copy nin felt his eyes go wide with pain and bit his lip to keep himself from crying out. He stumbled forward but then felt all the air in his lungs leave as a harsh knee connected with his stomach. He coughed, but before he could do anything he felt a foot connect with his face, sending him flying upwards. He opened his eyes and then saw Naruto blur into existence in front of him, bringing his sword down in a move that would cleave his skull open. He put his own blade in the way, but before Naruto's blade hit, the blonde vanished again. Kakashi then felt a harsh kick connect with the back of his head. How is he doing this? The copy nin wondered frantically. How can anyone be this fast? Hinata, however, from her vantage point, along with the chakra-seeing ability of the Byakugan, knew exactly what Naruto was doing. He had taken the most basic of ninja skills and had made it something incredibly deadly. He had first created a tornado of swirling leaves, and then, every time Kakashi would attack him, he would immediately replace himself with one of the leaves anywhere in the swirling mass, while simultaneously removing the signature cloud of smoke. Still, this confused her. In a kawarimi, the smaller the object you were replacing yourself with, the greater control you needed in order to accomplish it. For him to kawarimi with a leaf so easily was nothing short of remarkable, especially for someone with so much chakra. She pushed these thoughts aside and instead continued to watch the one-sided fight. Kakashi felt Naruto grab his ankle. The blonde then pulled him down so the copy nin was below him and delivered a hard, crushing axe kick to the Sharingan wielder's face, sending him plummeting back down to earth. Kakashi crashed into the ground, a massive cloud of dust and dirt being lifted as he fell. Naruto landed on the ground and stared into the hole, waiting for Kakashi to emerge, his sword at the ready. After several seconds that Kakashi did not emerge, Naruto's posture relaxed slightly, and that's when Kakashi struck. In an explosion of earth and debris, Kakashi shot out of the earth directly behind the slightly startled Anbu. He pumped his entire arm with as much chakra as he could and punched the young Naruto solidly in the face. Kakashi tried not to wince as the edge of Naruto's metallic face mask dug right between his knuckles, nearly breaking one. Still, Naruto could attest to the success of the attack as he was sent flying clear across their battleground, crashing into a tree, the wood groaning and creaking as a crack formed on the other side. Naruto snapped his head around and found Kakashi rushing towards him at high speeds, intent on keeping up the momentum his assault had granted him. Naruto put his legs to the tree trunk and jumped up in a flip just as Kakashi's fist was about to hit him. He went over the copy nin, flipped and landed behind him facing his back. Kakashi turned just in time to catch a foot to his face, making him hit the tree this time. Except this time it actually broke. Kakashi flipped and landed on his feet, skidding to a stop. He looked up and Naruto again blurred into existence right before his eyes, but this time Kakashi was finally able to see with his Sharingan just what the blonde had been doing. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. It's that simp. He got yet another knee to the face. This time, the edges of his vision went dark. He tried to stay conscious but soon fell into unconsciousness. Naruto approached the fallen Junin, knelt down next to him, removed the bells and stood. We pass, Hitaki. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.